Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
It's like I've forgotten how to say hello. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of Life with Kaka, this show where we talk to producers from all corners of the entertainment industry to understand what producers do, who the heck these people are, the challenges of the job, the many different paths that exist, and why we love it so much. I'm your host, Carolina Groppa. This week on the show, we have Deniese Davis, who has been on my personal radar for a very long time. One of the interesting things about this project is that I have chosen to speak to very busy people with busy lives, busy working producers. And as a working producer myself, oftentimes our schedules don't sync up. And so this particular interview took about 6 months to get on the books. But much like a vacation that you very much look forward to, it makes the experience that much sweeter. Deniese is behind one of my personal favorite shows, Insecure on HBO. Now in its 4th season, it's amazing to see how Deniese and Issa have been using their powers to create good. She's the COO and co-founder of ColorCreative, a production company she started with Issa Rae. The company aims at giving underrepresented writers an opportunity to share their stories. It's hella amazing. Deniese Davis, Issa Rae. These are names you should remember because they are a part of the movement that we are currently in to spearhead change and to create a more inclusive, diverse industry. It's a beautiful thing. And we all get to be a part of it in our own tiny way. Here we go. I feel like I'm a junkie for like authenticity.
That's a good way to put it.
I'm trying to put out good into our world.
I appreciate that.
Yeah. I'm not trying
not here to create the drama.
Yeah, like
Okay.
we have enough of that, and I'm not interested in that. So thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Oh my
it's
gosh.
so lovely to finally meet you. I feel like we've been trying to do this for like a few months.
I know, it's crazy. The year flies, but that's one of the good and the bad things about this project is the people I am interested in talking to are extremely busy doing great things. And so it means having to wait, but it makes it so much worth it, you know, that you finally get to talk. And it's like, oh, we've been looking forward to this for like 6 months.
And hopefully I have some good things to say. So
Oh my God,
I don't, let you down.
No, you would never let me down.
Okay.
I've been like reading about you and following you on Insta and just all up in your business in a non-stalker way, I hope, for a while. So I was like, yes, you know, because
thank you.
For me, this project is about going behind the title, going beyond that. And who you are as an individual and who you seem to be and who you present yourself to be is very interesting to me. It's very, I don't know, good. It's good. It's just like a good
vibes.
Good vibes,
That's,
you know?
That's the intention. So I'm glad it comes across.
Yeah, it comes across, at least for me. So,
well, thank you. Well, where do you want to start? I was like, I could talk all day on all these things.
Well, let's start at the beginning. I know
I could never not start off by just saying where I come from, because I think that has everything to do with how assertive I've become and how I finessed my hustle is what I like to say. But I was born and raised in Las Vegas, Nevada, and my mother was also born and raised in Nevada, right? So most of my family, if not all of my family, were in Vegas, and I grew up in a very like blue collar kind of workforce in terms of like the tourism in the industry of Las Vegas. And there's not a real entertainment industry. So I never knew anyone. I never even thought about filmmaking in that way because I just didn't know that was even a career path. And so I got really lucky in high school where I was introduced to a class that started doing the daily announcements over the intercom, but doing it via broadcast and broadcasting in all the other classrooms. And so I just by chance ended up in that class and learning, what they were doing. And by my senior year, I was editing, producing, directing the daily announcements. And so had a lot of fun, was being very creative. I was known as like the video girl at school. And so I was doing like school registration videos and commercials for the school dance on Saturday, like all these things because we got to program whatever.
Yeah.
And honestly, out of context in terms of the industry, right? And it was like, I'm just having fun. And no one was sitting there teaching me this is one way to do it or another. It's like I got to learn by doing. And so it's college time, and I was like, oh, I want to go to college. I looked into schools, and while I'm just even thinking about what I wanted to major in, I didn't know I could go to school for film. Like it was never didn't know anyone. I just discovered it from reading about it. And so I made it a choice that I like this thing that I'm doing. I can go to college, which I hadn't figured out what I wanted to do yet, and just learn more about this. Like this degree doesn't seem real. And so I took that leap of faith and moved to New York City and went to Brooklyn College, and went for film production, minored in TV radio. But I showed up very insecure, thinking that I was going to be around all these young film school kids who grew up, with family members and all these things. These young Steven Spielbergs who were like totally going to know more than I did. And so I remember being like, I can't show up my freshman year and not have an idea of like, what do I want to do? Like I was like, people are going to call themselves a director. People are going to call themselves this thing. And I was like, and I know there's other jobs. So like, what should I tell people? And so I got a bunch of books my freshman year. And one of the books I got was called So You Want to Be a Producer by Lawrence Terman. And
I know that book
and I say that book changed my life, and that I finished it. And I was like, yeah, I want to be a producer. And I was in college freshman year telling everyone I was like, I'm a writer. My name is Kenny. I want to be a cinematographer. And I was like, yeah, my name is Denise, and I want to be a producer. And so many people would be so caught off guard because they'd be like, first of all, you're from Vegas. And second of all, no one wants to be a producer. Like no one wants that this early.
Yeah.
But anyway, so that kind of is what got me on that mindset. And I always think how lucky I am that I've never wavered from that. I've had a lot of different jobs. I've done a lot of different things. But what I'm able to do now, I'm very blessed about because, I talk to friends and people I knew in high school or college, and they find it so inspiring that they're like, you always said you were going to do this and you're doing it, and they were like, you know how rare that is for someone to be at a young age and like make that statement and, and never kind of do anything else in that way. Right.
Yeah.
And I've made a successful career out of it now. And so, that's the interesting part. Because also I joke and tell people, I'm like, I'm turned 31 this year. Like I actually thought I'd be doing what I'm finally doing. I don't know, my 40s,
Really?
Yeah. Like as we both know, like this career, this industry takes time, right? It's like people think they're going to go make a movie in a year. And I'm like, be ready for 3 to 5 years of trying to get it made. And so I just assumed that my trajectory and the level of success that I was looking for wouldn't come until later. So.
Well, that's nice. rather than you thinking you were going to have it at 25 and then it's like 6 years too late.
I know. Well, actually, my joke is, and it's not a joke, but when I went to AFI for grad school, I got my master's in producing. And when I was in grad school, and Issa loves to say this, actually, she just mentioned it the other day, but I always believed that I was going to make movies, right? I was like, I want to make the Little Miss Sunshines of the world. I want that Oscar. I'm going to make character-driven, beautiful, independent films that matter. And the way my career has gone is that, I finished grad school. I got into digital. I transitioned into TV. I'm now developing movies, but I still never made a film. I've made now 2 TV shows before I've ever gotten to actually make a film. And I just find it so ironic. And my true dreams was, I used to tell people in grad school, I was like, I was blessed and finished AFI when I was 24. So I was like, I'm going to make a film. 27, I'm going to win an Oscar by the time I'm 30. And then, I'm going to go off and just have this amazing, crazy career in my 30s and be known as like, God, I don't want to say the name now, but at the time, like the Weinstein company of like production companies, by the time I'm in my 40s. No, definitely didn't happen that way. And to this day, I have not made a film. So, yeah.
But you're getting close.
Getting close.
We're
developing.
Yeah.
We have 2 films in development now that are set up. A couple others that we're taking out soon. And it's also what my quote lately has just been like, it's champagne problems, guys. Like I'm so busy. Sure. I have had no time to just like even have time for myself lately, which is something I'm learning. But the funny part is I'm like, oh, but you asked for this. Like, this is what you wanted. This is what you signed up for. Yeah. And, and success doesn't come from being idle, right? It's just like, you got to do the work. And I've always been a person who's done the work. So,
yeah. Well, I want to touch real quick on what you just said about the sort of self-care part of it. I'm curious, long pause, how that's been going and what you've been learning about what you need and taking care of yourself, because it is a marathon and the longevity you need to have, right? If you're not taking time to recalibrate and reset your soul, then is the work worth it? Does it matter?
No, because I don't think you enjoy it if you don't take that time, right? And so for me, one of the biggest things I've learned in the last few years, really, because the last few years of my life is the only time I've actually had stability, right? In terms of like, I've made enough money where I don't have to worry about money now.
Yeah.
I've made, I have a full-time job, whereas prior to Insecure and prior to Issa getting an HBO deal, I was still freelancing, to make a living and working with Issa when she had a project for us to do together. And when she wasn't, I had to go and find jobs, right? And so part of that transition was realizing like, when I was in the freelance space, God, I used to work around the clock, and I was a freelance line producer, but I was mostly in the independent digital shorts and music video space. So anything under 100 grand, people called me for.
Rough.
And that's grueling work, right?
Work.
And so many times, often than not, that I was so many different positions, right? I had to be my own UPM, I was my own location manager. It was like, you have to, it's the only way you can do projects like that on that budget is to step up and do more work. But that being said, I used to work 24/7, right? Director, I would be scouting on a Saturday. Director would call me Sunday night at 10 p.m. because like I was that producer who was always available and helping, ready to solve any problems and ready to kind of step in. And so, at the time I'm young, I'm in my 20s, so it doesn't take a taxing toll on me. And I'm also eager and I'm hungry and I'm going to do the work. And so none of that mattered, right? Like I had relationships and stuff, but I just didn't mind that 7-day a week, 80 hours a week kind of workhorse. And sometimes I was producing multiple projects at a time,
Well, and we're told like, oh, if you want to get where you're going, you got to work hard.
Yeah.
And then you think, I guess work hard is 7 days a week.
Yeah, you're just like, no one's telling me to slow down.
Yeah,
no
so
one's
you
like,
keep going.
yeah, no one's going to complain that I'm, overworking myself.
Yeah.
And thankfully, I never fully got burnt out then, just because it was such a hustle. And it was just like, probably when I look back now, it's just like one of the most enjoyable times that I'm never going to forget about, because you don't get those years back. You know what I mean? Now that I've kind of graduated from that, I'm just like, I'm never going to have those like broke years where like nothing else mattered but the work,
Yeah.
So anyway, so now that I've transitioned in the last 3 years to not a true 9-to-5, but essentially an executive, right? A producer who's working full time at a company and getting paid a salary and not having to fend for myself. I all of a sudden had this constant where I was like, oh, I don't have to work in the evenings if I don't want to. I don't have to like be up until midnight sending emails. If I've been sending them all day, I don't have to feel like, oh, I need to schedule a brunch or a lunch with an executive or a network on the weekends, and I had to start being really intentional with the time that I allow myself to work and the time that I find to carve out for myself and, my relationship in terms of, we live together. And so I was like, I don't want to be that person who is a workaholic for 40 years and then finally looks up at retirement to decide that they want to slow down, right? And not that I'm slowing down, because I'm busier than I've ever been, but I've been really proud that I've just been able to turn it off when I need to. And so now, like, one of my rule of thumbs is, after like 7-8 p.m. when I feel like the calls slow down and the emails slow down, and I may still get them here and there, but I try not to really check them. I don't respond. I'll read a lot. I'll read emails and stuff, but I won't respond right away. And my rule of thumb is this time sensitive where I know I have to respond right now because something is depending on it. Or if I got back to this person at 9 a.m. tomorrow, would it make a difference?
Right.
You know what I mean? And that's my rule of thumb. If it's like, well, no, there's no reason why I need to confirm this in this moment, or why I need to write this person back about lunch right this minute. My colleague and I go back and forth because he's like, you can do everything by your phone. It's just so easy. Like, he's so quick. He'll respond something in 10 minutes. And I'm like, yeah, I could do that, but I need to like control when I'm actively working, because I'm not paying attention to what's around me.
Yeah.
You know
well, and
I
I think that the digital age and having us be so accessible via a phone that's always in our pocket, to me sends the message that you're always available. And then what does that say? Like, if you are always available, what message are you putting out there?
Yeah.
Right? Like you're saying, I think if it can wait, it should wait, because what difference is it going to make? And it's really a matter of your own psyche and your own like self-care, and I do believe that nowadays there's this shift, it seems to be happening, that people are taking the time to wait and respond in business hours unless it's urgent. And I respect that, because I think we've made ourselves there's this feeling, especially I think maybe in the transition you're talking about, as a freelancer, you're like, oh, you're
used to it. Yeah.
There's like always this feeling in your gut of like, this thing. And it's like, no, just calm down. Like it's all going to be fine.
Yeah.
Breathe.
Well, and I really feel like it's finding that great work-life balance. And I think it works differently for everyone, right?
Yeah.
Like the things that I do may not be the same for someone else, but you can always adjust it to make it work for you, right? And so like one of the things too that I'm trying to curb, but I haven't been good at is like, I'm a night owl. I'm not a morning person. So for me to get up, even I'd say before 8:30, 8 a.m. is like it's really tough on me because chances are I'm up until on average maybe 12:30, 1 a.m. And that's late for a lot of people. You know, I know a lot of people who are early birds and they get all this stuff done. And and so that's been a thing where I was like, I want to be one of those people. I want to be able to just be done with my day at 4 o'clock and feel so productive. But I've tried to change my habits, and lately I was like, oh, I should own up and be like, maybe that's just not me. You know, like I don't have to conform because other people said it works great for them. I've tried it, and that to me, that's always the most important thing. It's like, oh, I tried, right?
Yeah, and so you're doing that. You've taken that.
Yeah,
more or less. I'm sure there's meetings and things sometimes you can't work around.
Yeah, no, exactly. But now I've just been like, oh, okay, like my first meetings in the mornings, unless it has to be a breakfast meeting for someone else's avails, usually start at like 10, right? Yeah. So then that allows me to get up at like 8:30 and like feel like I'm up and about my day. Like,
well, and then I think you're showing up as like the best version of you anyway. Yeah. So that person only benefits from you knowing your limits and knowing where you're going to thrive.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I don't think you're doing anyone a disservice. I think you should continue.
No, thank you.
Doing what you're doing. Not that you need my approval, but yes.
Thank you. It's all a learning process. I mean, the best thing about our industry and about what we do is tell people, I'm like, there's no rule book. You know, like I read this book, So You Want to Be a Producer, but I'd say I probably haven't looked at it since college, and half of the things he's probably talking about in there I may or may not have done by now, right? Yeah. And so producing and the industry in general, I was like, God, like even the way Hollywood works sometimes, I'm like, guys, you know, like there's no rule. Like this is not a government ran industry where that says this has to be done this way. It's just what's always been done historically. And it's so hard to change tradition. It's so hard to change people's minds, right? Yeah. And so when I think about like how we are conditioned to work around the clock, how we're just always on, or we feel like we have to be at every party. We feel like we have to be seen and be heard. And, you know, on one hand, sometimes it's like, yeah, you know, you need a network. You need to always be fostering and creating new relationships. But on the other hand, that can mean an entirely different thing. You know, it does not mean I have to be out every single night.
For sure. Well, and it's liberating and sort of like suffocating at the same time.
Yeah.
You know,
it's very true.
There are no rules. And so you want to go, if there are no rules, then why can't we do things this way?
Yeah.
You know, but sometimes you got to play the game and you got to sort of walk down that path before you can be like, no, this is we're going to go here now. We're going to go right. We're going to do it this way. But it's hard, especially when you're doing and creating the kind of work that is new or hasn't really been done in Hollywood. You know, I'm sure that breeds its own sort of set of challenges.
Absolutely. I mean, it's kind of like what you were saying earlier is not just as a woman and a woman of color, but just by the work that we're doing feels like an uphill battle, right? It feels like we have to work twice as hard. And that's just because on one hand, you are having to change mindsets. You are having to change the way people's perceptions and the way they have always done a certain job or the way they've always looked at certain content. You know, and you're honestly challenging that. And sometimes you win, sometimes you don't. But I think what keeps us, you know, even the success that we've been able to build to date, half of it has been because we haven't given up, right? Because we share the passion of like, oh, this is like, we know what we're doing is right. We have, there's some ideals there that we hold really close to us as like values that we're like, this should be the way things are in 2019, right? It's like we're fighting things that are just crazy to think about, but knowing that everything's a journey. You know, like change never happens overnight either. No. So so it's an interesting battle, I will say.
What are some of the perceptions you feel like you've had to battle against
as an individual, as a producer?
Both?
As both. Ooh. You know, as a producer, not so much now. Maybe it kind of blends into both. And not so much now because I feel like I'm a grown-ass woman now. But back when I was in my 20s, you know, you got to think I'm coming at AFI at 24 and decided to forego an assistant round. And I was like, I'm just going to go freelance. I can make shit. And so deciding to do that led me to some really great big opportunities. But I'm on set at 25 as a young woman of color, you know, producing this like $100,000 music video with all these grown ass men around me who, you know, are kind of, they were never disrespectful per se, but they're talking down to you, right? Hey girl, hey little girl, sweetie, you know, just like trying to like very clearly acknowledging my age, right? Or my sex and my race. And And again, like, I've never had anyone call me out. And I think it's because as a producer, I held the power. I tell people, I'm like, you would think twice as a crew member to cross the producer who has to sign your check. You know what I mean? And so I always think I got shielded from a certain level of blatant like racism or disrespect that most people would have to deal with. However, it's not to say that I haven't seen my fair share. And I always just think that I was lucky, and I had to really honestly grow balls to be able to be like, I'm not going to let that phase me, because that's what they want, right? You're 24, 25 years old. They want to see you not be good for the job. Yeah. And I always let my work show up for myself. That's the one thing about my reputation and about the things I've done is I was like, this matters more than this moment. You know what I mean? And I'm not going to let somebody get in the way of that. So, you know, I think now one of the challenges that I'm finding just more on the career front or producing front is, you know, we're taking out projects that we're passionate about and things that we feel like no one else is doing in a way that's like, there's no reason why this show shouldn't exist. And it's been really frustrating to, you know, not hear the things you want to hear, right? When you know a project is so great. And the hardest thing about the industry is sometimes no one wants to be honest. And so you hear all these different reasons why it's not going to sell from the buyers. And, you know, one of the things that flipped a switch for me was realizing, and no shade, but, you know, we're taking out a Black female comedy series and pitched to like 8 different people in the room. And just recently was the first time we ever pitched to another Black female buyer in the room. And honestly had to have a question of, that was probably the best conversation we had after a pitch. And is that why? You know, did she connect with this differently because of the relatability factor or the cultural factor? Yeah. And I think everyone else we pitched to was just as sound and sweet and, you know, smart and gave us their honest feedback about it, but it just had a different feeling, right? And that idea that I'm like, oh God, all these companies, everyone wants to be inclusive. Diversity is such a hot topic word. Buzzword. They all want change, but I'm like, but the makeup of their internal structures, you're like, wow, we have a lot of way to go. Right. And so that's a challenge I'm seeing on a daily where I'm like, well, how do we as producers and as people in this industry try to push for more inclusive content, push to work with more inclusive talent if the barriers of entry, the powers that be, don't change?
Right. I mean, I think it's a generational thing as well. I think that my hope is that the people who are assistants now that are coming up and growing up in this climate and have sort of grown up with all of the social issues that have been going on in our culture outside of this industry, more visually so than I think maybe our generation, maybe they'll be the ones. But like you said, change is so slow. And Hollywood is so set in their ways, even though it can all change. It's still, someone once said this was the way, and so this is the way because 90% of the time this way works. And so let's not veer from that. That's scary.
Let's not rock the boat, guys. It's how it's always been.
It's a lie, you know? And it's funny because the way that progress has happened and people who have blown the minds of, you know, creatives in Hollywood has been by people who have rocked the boat, especially in the last decade.
Disruptors, right?
The disruptors. So it's like everybody wants to, you know, be the one rubbing shoulders with the disruptor, but nobody wants to give the disruptor that chance.
But to your point, it's the reason why the most important people in life and within this industry are the ones who are going to take that risk. Yeah. Right. Because all it takes is one person to fund that project, to open that door, to make that introduction, because you're going to hear a lot of no's. But the one person who's willing to stand up is the one person, A, that you don't forget, and 2, that you know truly made a difference, right? Because like you said, there'll be a bandwagon where everyone else who said no is all of a sudden like, oh my God, it's so amazing. And it's like, but we came to you first.
And you passed on it.
And you passed, you know, or you said no to this. And it's fascinating how that works, but it's all, you know, this also what we said earlier is like people want to get put on, they want to be seen and they want to be heard, and, you know, and it's fascinating place in that way.
It's a really crazy place, but I'm curious how you grew your balls, like what you did, because I do think that is an important, as someone who also went down a similar path. I didn't go be an assistant and go up that route. I just really was like, I'll just make my own stuff and figure it out and learn as I go. I didn't even go to school for it, actually, which makes it a little different.
Oh, wow.
I just had to demand that respect without knowing what I was doing and not faking my way, but just, you know, really having the confidence that I would figure it out. I think. But there is that hurdle of learning and having people sort of perceive you and take you seriously. And I've also had similar experiences where I had to be like, oh, I need to grow my own set of balls, and oh, I need to have thicker skin, and oh, you have to be selective of the battles you're going to fight as a producer, you know, and sometimes you do have to let a lot of things go. And even though in your professional life, you may have to just like let it roll off your, you know, your back. In your personal life, you're like crying to your friend that like someone was mean to you, essentially. It's kind of what it is. I think especially the physical production side of things, we get dumped on so much by people who don't understand what we do, who take for granted what we do without understanding it. And you don't, depending on the length of the project, like you don't get to have an outlet to just let that shit go. No. And I think that's the stuff that builds up and creates really cynical, angry, bitter people working in this business. It's not being able to just like decompress, because it is so much that's put on you. It just takes so much from you. So long-winded way to ask, but like, what was the shift that you made internally to find that?
Well, honestly, it sounds so, it's not even going to be, I don't know if cliche is the word, but I've had a lot of time to be introspective about that, right? To be understand, and mostly maybe because some people mostly ask about my persona now, where they're just like, God, how'd you become so confident? Like, how did you just become this like strong-willed woman? And I was like, well, on one hand, I've kind of always been that way, but also when I tell people I'm an introvert, they're like, yeah, right. And I'm like, no, like I'm actually a very shy person in general. But what I had to learn through production, and when I say like, oh, I had to grow some balls, it was this idea of, you know, a lot of people, it's funny, Issa that was talking about her Woman in Film gala speech, but, you know, as women, we're tended to be seen as like, we have to be humble, right? Or we have to be nice. We have to play nice. We have to be sweet. And not that I've never not been those things, but I also was like, I have to show up like I belong here, right? Because if I don't mentally have the confidence to, you know, push my weight around, so to speak, and not in an, you know, in an ego powerful way, as much as it's just like, no, like when they throw slide comments, when people, you know, disrespect you or do anything or put you down, it's all to see you break, right? And not that I was like, oh, I can't let them see me fail. It was also mentally, I had to be like, I deserve to be here. I know what I'm doing. I'm good at what I do. And there's nothing that no one else can do or say that should change that otherwise, right? And I think once I focused on that and allowed myself to really live and walk the walk and talk the talk in that way every day, it just eventually gave me the confidence to be secure in myself, right? And it also, you know, in some ways, it was tied to even my sexuality. You know, I date women. And so in my early 20s, once I became comfortable with knowing that's who I was like, I'm going to wear it. You know, I'm not going to be shy away from it. And so it had to be the same with producing. It had to be the same with being a young woman of color doing this work of this line of work that I chose to do. I was like, I can't ever go into any room and not let them believe that I don't deserve to be here. And that gave me balls. That allowed me to, you know, not let anything offend me, not let anything, you know, become too personal or anything. Cause I was like, I don't care what you say. Like, you know, I know what I'm doing.
I think it's a little upsetting. And I'm just realizing that we use this idea of having balls to describe just confidence and assertiveness. That part is such a, just already it's so ingrained in us that even in our speech, we're like, oh yeah, you gotta have balls. It's like, you gotta be a man.
You gotta be a man? Masculine. What does that mean?
No, that's not what that means. And so I think it's like changing the script. And so I'm even like angry at myself for
calling it back. I mean, I did say it first, so I'm angry at
but like just talking about it, it's just, it's part of that, the small, tiny changes we have to make, even in the way we describe things. Like, to me, what you're describing is just someone who is assertive and centered in who they are and grounded in who they are.
Well, I'd like to think that having found, you know, the centeredness of it all, you know, I tell myself like, oh, I can never make a bad choice. You know, I'm going to make the wrong choices every once in a while, but I should always feel confident about whatever decision I have to make, right? Yeah. Because I know myself, because I trust my intuition, because I know what's right and what's wrong. And, you know, I let that follow I let that determine what I'm going to do half the time, right? Whether it's a producing decision, whether it's a personal decision, whether it's a career decision. Like I think about my 4 years of freelancing and I'm like, I don't make no money. And like, but look where I ended up, and it was just me having this leap of faith optimism of like, I'm happy doing what I always wanted to do, and wherever this leads to, great. But I also was intentional about the jobs I said yes to, right?
Yeah.
I was intentional about the companies and things that I knew I would work on, and the things that I was like, I'm not going to waste my time on that. So even just having those times of decision honestly helped really influence me, right? And always come back around to continue to keep me grounded, because it was like, I was right, or like those aha moments where you're just like, oh, this feels good. This is reaffirming what I thought I believed.
Yeah.
So
I forgot to ask you this, because sometimes this happens and we're like 30 minutes into our conversation. Can you define producer?
I've had to a couple times. So now I have a couple of definitions. Can I define a producer? So the best way I define the role is, I tell people, think of a company, especially like a corporate company, right? And everyone has a manager or a boss. Everyone has the CEO or the president of that company, whoever it is who is truly managing the day-to-day operations of that company. I see a producer as an example of that, right? The biggest thing is, as a producer, a project usually starts with someone, right? Inherently, whether the producer develops it themselves or scripts comes to them. And then they're on beyond anyone all the way through the end, right? And everything in the middle is usually decisions made with the producer as the leader. You are the manager. You're everyone's boss. Everyone comes to you for solutions and for problems. You have to be that person who can be quick on their feet and honestly problem solve day in and day out, and hold people's hands and have the hard conversations and know what needs to be done, and have creative solutions to figuring out problems too, and be able to know how to talk to your director, but then talk to the studio and keep everyone happy. And so you really are this person that's so integral to any project and the pen of any project, that it is like one of the hardest roles for people to ever figure out like how to do it. It's a job, like almost any job, but different than a director where it's technical, or different than a cinematographer where it's technical. It's like, or a writer, you get to sit down and write and be better at it. I'm like, you kind of have to continue to produce, but also you can't just produce one project and feel confident, because there's so many facets to producing that even now, after doing it for 12, 13 years since college, there's still things I'm learning, because I've never had to be faced with it as a producer, right? Because it's just like, there's a new problem today. I've never had to deal with this. So that's the interesting thing, is that it's such a sometimes an undefinable job, but it encompasses so many things, which is why I love, it's like, oh, we're called one thing, but you and I both know, like, we do so many things, right? Honestly, the other thing, the best word to define it is accountability, right? A producer is accountable for the project. Period. I mean, a director has to elevate it, but your job is to help them do their job and be their ally. And so it's like, at the end of the day, if you're not a great producer, everything will fall apart.
Right. and that's the thing. It's like, when you're doing a good job, like, nobody sees you or hears from you. It's only when things are falling apart, then all of a sudden it's like, where is the producer? They were not around. They weren't here for this. No, it's so true. I try explaining this a lot to like certain family members, and it's still, they don't get it. Oh, my parents still think I'm a director. They still don't understand what I do. I think there needs to be like a little like YouTube 2-minute video
thing,
like those where they do the animation as it's being narrated with like what a producer does, because then we can send it around to family members as a reminder.
Well, no one knows. And then, I always feel bad, and not bad, but like I get some people who ask, they want to shout at me as a producer because they want to learn. And I'm like, telling them like, you're never gonna really understand what I do by shouting me for a day. And I was like, especially you'll be like, wait, this is what you do all day? Like when I'm not in production, I'm like in and out of meetings, I'm in my car, I'm on the phone. I'm like, you don't want to be around any of that. There's nothing to learn. You know, it's so hard to learn producing by watching someone else produce. It's like, you have to put yourself in it to understand what is expected of you for the job. Right. So
and how does that how does that definition differ from your new title now as somebody who is the COO of a company? It's a very sort of impressive title on paper, but how does that morphed for you, and what is your day-to-day actually like now that you're in a more perceived, like you said, stable 9 to 5-ish kind of life?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I still produce when we have things to produce. But no, it's been an interesting thing where I realized and I've been saying this about myself, where I'm like, oh, in the last year, I feel like I've transitioned into a hybrid where I am still producer, but I've become like a producer entrepreneur, which is, you know, to a producer's credit, in a lot of ways you already have those skill sets, right? But it's now encompassed an actual job of mine, right? Where on one hand, I'm still developing and producing projects that I'm passionate about and that I love within the company with Issa. But at the same time, I'm looking at our company and the business that we're in and the things we want to do, and having to have those conversations or just those daydreams about like, okay, what do we want? How do we get there? What are the steps? What are all the things that could benefit us? Why? What's important about it? What's our priority? You know, and because I like to joke and I'm like, we always start off with more than what we can have, right? It's just like, we have big dreams. And then we have to backtrack and be like, okay, well, what can we actually do right now? And so now my 9 to 5 is, you know, one half giving notes, reading scripts, taking pitch meetings, the whole creative producing side. And on the other half, honestly, strategizing, trying to figure out, you know, business deals and partnerships and things that make sense for us, that also helps promote the brand, right? I spent 6 months between late last year and going into the top of this year. You know, I told you, so I was like, we should get a new logo. We hadn't touched it in like 4 years. So we went after and found someone to help us with that. We redid our website. We became more engaged on social media through ColorCreative. And so even those small steps, right? It was like thinking as a COO and being like, oh, okay, we need to be promoting this company, you know, consistently. So that way, as we're starting to engage and get into, you know, all these businesses and other things, because we're just beyond producing with what we do. You know, I want it to all feel like there's synergy, and this is all feeding back into each other. And so, yeah, so that's been crazy, because I'm like, oh, you asked me if you met me out of grad school or undergrad, like, Denise, what are you gonna be doing at 30? I'm gonna be like, I don't know, making movies, you know? And now I found myself building a company. Like, it's crazy to me. And also no rule book, right? A lot of what we're doing is built on instinct and what we feel like should be done.
Yeah. I mean, that's producing in a nutshell.
It's producing. Yeah,
really.
It's producing.
It's just interesting, because it's like you hold a different title and there are slightly different things where it's almost like you get to kind of do it all in a way, right? Whereas maybe before you were just a line producer who came in and just ran the production. Now, when there is something in production, you get to be a part of that production, but you still get to be a part of, like you said, shaping something larger, like a collective that's so much bigger than individual little projects that amount to something greater. And that's
I mean, and that's the other thing. It's like one part of it's like, oh yeah, I still get to produce. I still get to make things I love, right? And that's like the wins, and that's what, like, it's not necessarily what keeps me excited or passionate, because it all does. And that's the other thing, is to realize that you can be passionate about something else, even though it's still connected, right? To be like, oh, like, who knew that this was going to be my thing? Who knew that I had a good business sense, or a good idea of, you know, just good ideas sometimes that when I pitch them and then see them actually be executed and we do it, and, you know, I'll sit back and be like, wow, that was fun. And I think it's like that adrenaline too, that also comes from producing, where you're just like, yeah, you have an idea, you put it on paper, you make it a reality, and then you watch it with a bunch of other people and you're like, holy shit, like, there's very few things in the world where you get to have that experience, you know, that you really get a part of, like, creating something. So yeah, it's very interesting.
So it's really amazing. I mean, what would you say then is like a big misconception that people have about producers?
Well, two things. I'd say that a lot of producers, they don't know what they're doing, right? Or they have an ego. Like, you can imagine how many creators or auteurs think they don't need a producer, right? Or they've had producers and they're useless, they're lazy, right? And so I know that's such a myth, because unfortunately I know there's a lot of people out there who do fit that, and mostly because, you know, I'm very sensitive about my title with the producing, because I'm like, God, you come to LA and you meet so many producers, quote unquote, and you're just like, you've never made, or you don't actually really know what this job is, or, you know, they're like, they're phonies, right? Let's be honest. And so they're the ones who make it very hard and give us a bad rep for other people who may not know, especially young creators. They get taken advantage of. They meet these shady producers who like take their script and go make it without them and don't pay them, or steal their idea. You know, all these things that you're just like, I don't understand how people could be that shady, but it happens. So one of the biggest misconceptions is that that's how producers are, unless you're with a legitimate company who's done anything. If you meet someone and you tell them you're a producer, you know, unless you have something to back it up, they're like, ooh, I don't know. And so it's really hard for young producers to be given a chance, right? And to just be given that risk. And then the other thing is that they're power trips and egos, right? People think that all producers have to be megomaniacs, and it's like, well, no, there's some really good natured, well balanced ones. And let's be honest, I've also met the ones who aren't so nice, who are assholes, who are exactly what you would think of them. And you know what? Their time is gonna come, you know, and I think because this business is built on relationships, and we're now living in a completely different era where a lot of shit you can't do that used to be able to get away with.
Finally,
Jesus. I mean, it only took 100 years.
I know.
But
imagine where we'll be in 100 years. You have to imagine it because we won't be alive.
We'll be making movies on Mars.
Yeah.
There'll be like, hey, did you go to Mars Hollywood and pitch this project? Oh, everyone in India said no. You should try the moon, or you should try Mars.
Yeah.
I heard they have a huge production fund to shoot in space. To shoot in space.
Just a few questions that I'll ask them, like sort of in sequentially, and you can just kind of answer them.
Okay.
You know, what have been some of your, when you had career lulls or lulls in your life, in your personal life, how have you managed to get yourself out of them? Particularly like before you got into this stage of your career where one could perceive that you've got it all, you know, from the outside, but everything, when things are not going right, when you're sort of questioning, why did I choose this? And why is this happening? What is it that you do, or who is it that is there to help you get through those moments of self-doubt, or of, you know, when you feel sort of just spent by this industry and you keep going? Then what is it that keeps you coming back to it, right? What is it that you love about it? And then to sum it all up, you know, what advice would you give to someone who's interested in getting into the business? And what's the legacy you hope to leave behind? So that's 4 questions.
Loaded. All right. Let's
Loaded,
get into it.
5 minutes.
Loaded,
go.
5 minutes. Go. Well, to answer your first question, it's a 2-parter that I'll keep it short and sweet. The one person I go to a lot that's obviously been there since the day I was born is my mother, right? Single mom, raised me and my sister single-handedly, and
that's amazing.
and always supported whatever it is I want to do. She was one of those parents who never wanted to have me live her life, right? Where it was like, when I didn't get into college first time around, or get into the schools I wanted to, she was like, you know, she sat me down and told me I didn't have to go to college if I didn't want to, and not to think that I had to do it for her or anyone else. And if I wanted to work or move to LA and just figure it out, she was like, whatever it is, we'll figure it out together. And like, I support you, and whatever your dreams are, they'll get there, but don't feel like you have to take the beaten path that everyone else takes, right? And that, you telling me that at 17 always stuck with me, but also, you know, how I've evolved as an individual. You know, one of the things that I find myself thinking about when I get knocked down, or when I just get really frustrated with my goals, is having to remind myself to be humble for what I've accomplished, right? And having to check myself and be like, wow. And maybe it's because I come from Vegas and a lot of friends and family who are still there and are still in their jobs. And we know the people who, you know, you stay at a company for years and you retire. And I'm just like, wow, I'm extremely lucky to even be having a chance of what I'm doing, right? And so that keeps me going in a way, where I always have to remind myself of that, and let that be what drives me, and how I follow my heart, and how I take those risks. Because it's just like, well, what do I have to lose? Like, I have a home, I can go home, I can get a regular job, you know, I can get out of this industry and disappear and go sign up for a corporate job and be fine, right? I'm like, I'm gonna be okay. I'll never be homeless. So therefore, let me take the risk. And the thing that keeps me coming back after I've kind of gotten knocked down, or having to remind myself of that, is this idea that, like, why not, right? And also, we were talking about disruptors earlier. I always believe in this, like, well, if I don't do it, someone else might, But if I do it, then I guarantee that it gets done and I don't have to depend on hoping that someone else is going to do it. Right.
Yeah.
But also just this idea that like, I look at my journey to date and it's always been, built on risk. It's always been on like, I don't know what's going to happen next, but I know, what I love doing. And what most important is just like, this is what I'm happy doing. You know, I'm just like, this keeps me happy. I find joy in my job. And I think that is so important because there's so many people who don't have that. And it's so hard to stay motivated, right?
Yeah.
If you're just like, I don't love this. And we were just talking about this earlier. There's a certain moment where you'll have good money, you'll have success, all those things will come. But if you're not happy and if you're not truly like just waking up every day looking forward to doing this work, then chances are there's something else for you. You know what I mean? And so I haven't hit that break yet. And until I do, I was like, I'm going to enjoy this ride. You know, I'm going to bounce back in. So those are the first two questions. And then this last two, one was about advice into young producers. You know, I was touching on this earlier and saying that there's no one way to produce, but I tell people it's like, you don't need me to validate you as a producer. For people who are aspiring, it's just like they want to pick my brain, they want to go to coffee with me, they want to shadow me, they want me to mentor them, and I'm always happy to do those things whenever I can give advice and resources. But second to none, the only way you become successful, the only way you really even get a chance to learn how to produce is to do it.
Yeah.
And I can't do that for you. Right? It's like, I may be able to introduce you to someone who's trying to do a web series and they're looking for a producer, but you have to take the initiative to do the work. You have to put yourself out there, and you can't be afraid to just learn and also fail, because that's the biggest thing. Is like, we learn the most by when we fail.
Well, by failing, and you learn, just to interject, that nobody really has the answer.
No.
That there is no way to get there but to go through it.
1000%. It's like, you have to do the work. You have to
do the work.
Roll up your sleeves and get dirty. And so your last question, man, I've had to think about the legacy thing. You know, I had a moment when I turned 30 and realizing what I'm doing and where I'm at. And again, I told you earlier, like, this was like my long-term plan. I was just like, I would never reach what I'm able to be doing until my 40s or 50s. And that's just because conditionally, most people you see do the things I do are just older, right? And I just got a head start. So that being said, when I got to do a lot of this sooner than expected, I had to think beyond that and say, oh, well, what now, right? Like, it's like, I can't be complacent. And once you reach your goals or reach that pinnacle, you know, you should always want more, right? You should always be thinking of something else to kind of keep you passionate and excited and after it. And so I had to think about, I was like, well, what does Denise want in her 40s? Now that you've done what you thought you were going to do, what do you want your 30s to be about? What do you want your 40s to be about? You know, and realizing how much real estate I have left in this game, in this industry too, right? Like, people stay around doing this forever. I don't want to be one of those people, but when my time is up, what do I want to be known for? What do I want to be proud of? What do I want to feel like I've accomplished? And, you know, I think part of that is certain accolades as it relates to projects that we can help get off the ground, right? But I think more importantly, you know, one of my, I'm a huge history nerd in terms of Hollywood history and old Hollywood, and read a lot of books, and, you know, I know a lot about that past. And one person that's always stuck out to me that I've been inspired by has been Irving Thalberg. You know Irving Thalberg?
I don't, actually.
Irving Thalberg was the man who basically created MGM, right? Like, everyone knows Louis B. Mayer, but Irving Thalberg was like 28 years old, was like brought in MGM early on in the 20s, and he created technically the studio system as we know it today. It was his brainchild to be like, we're going to bring these producers, we're going to bring in this daytime crew, this is how we're going to operate, because, you know, in that day is like, that didn't exist, right? It was like, literally, again, all these rules are made up. People just decided this is going to be the way projects get made. This is going to be the way we do production. And he was very instrumental in creating a lot of that. They called him Boy Wonder, because he also passed away in his early 30s. And now the Producers Guild actually has one of their highest producing awards is the Irving Thalberg Award. So anyways, all that to say, I think about his legacy. And although, like I said, his name, and like, no one recognizes him, right? And to me, it's not about the recognition, but legacy is more importantly, like, can I leave behind something that will continue to be instrumental to others or be instrumental to the industry and live beyond me. So if it's not that in 100 years, you can't ask somebody like, oh, you don't know who Deniese Davis is. I'm like, I don't care that they don't know who I am, but I care about what I'm able to help create that wasn't there before.
Yeah.
And that's the other part. I haven't figured it out yet, right? It could be.
Yeah, of course. If you had, I'd be
if
like,
I had, I would be
like,
pitching
what are
you
you
right
drinking?
now,
Like,
right?
I need to get
No.
some of that, you know?
But it could be a number of things. It could be the way we work as in Hollywood. I like to say we're outsiders. We're building our own version of it, and hopefully the two shall merge at some point. It could be, building a studio from the ground up, right? It could be any number of things that honestly beyond a project is something that is tangible, sustainable, and durable that would be around forever.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, I think you have a lot of incredible options in there, honestly.
I'm not there yet, but thank you.
No, in terms of what you think your legacy could be.
Oh, yeah.
And you're on the right path. You're part of the movement that people will be reading about in some years. I don't know exactly what that movement is because we're in it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? When you're living it, you don't know what it is until later. Then you're like, oh, let's write about this time in history when this happened.
Yeah.
But when you're in the middle of the movement, it's kind of hard to quantify it sometimes. And I look at someone like you and Issa and what you guys have done with your company and with the work you're creating and the way it's resonating and connecting with people all over the world and seeing different perspectives. And that's what it's all about.
1000%.
That is the power of storytelling. So,
thank you so much.
Thank you for your time.
Are you kidding me? Thank you. We finally got to do this, guys. It only takes 6 months to
oh my
schedule
God.
with me.
But hey,
no, we were both in production, I think, at one point.
Well, I was in production till May, and it was
we were shooting another series in April. It was
all good problems. I believe it always happens at the time it's supposed to.
It is. That is my belief too. But I enjoyed myself. So thank you so much.
Thank
for
you
having
so
me.
much.
Of course.
This is amazing. Well, there you go. Another one for the books. I really hope you enjoyed this conversation. I know I say this every week, but it gives me so much joy to get to have these chats with women producers I admire and bring them to you, into your ears, into your home, or wherever it is that you listen to your podcasts. So thank you so much for tuning in, for continuing to be on this messy ride that is life with me, with Kaka. I'd love to hear from you. I'm at Carolina Groppa. The show's at Life with Kaka. Like, subscribe, rate, wherever it is you get your podcast. Thank you for tuning in. I'll see you next week. Beijos.